Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome from me, Michael Scott in Oxford in the UK, and from my joint convener, Sanford J. Ungar in Washington, DC, to this jointly promoted event between the Future of the Humanities Project and the Free Speech Project. The latter is sponsored by Georgetown University and the former by Georgetown's Humanities Initiative in association with the Las Casas Institute for Social Justice at Blackfriars Hall, the University of Oxford in the UK. Together, these two projects consider issues concerning human dignity, rights, cultures, histories, traditions, and politics in the wide spectrum of educational activity, policy, expression, and aspiration. Today's event is one I've been looking forward to very much with excitement for some time, as we welcome good friends and colleagues from Moscow, Scotland, and the USA, who will be contributing to our session on academic freedom across boundaries. In a moment, I'll hand over to Sandy, who is director of the Free Speech Project. He will introduce today's distinguished panel and moderate the ensuing discussion before I return a little later for the question and answer sessions. Starting from now, you can type your questions by using the Q&A key at the bottom of your screen. These will come to me during the session, and I will try to sort them into some logical order and put as many of them as possible to the panel for consideration. We urge you, please, to keep your questions as short as you can. If time doesn't allow for your questions to be answered today, an appropriate panel member will try to answer it by email. So, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the event. You are one of over 100 from around the world who've registered for this event. Over to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Mike. Good to see everyone this morning. We're particularly pleased to have a broad international cross-section which is what we aim for in these international dialogues. Happy to welcome Natalia Trufanova and Alexander Chernikov, both from Bauman State Technical University in Moscow, John Drakakis from University of Stirling in Scotland, and Nadine Strossen, former president of the American Civil Liberties Union, and still for many years a professor at New York Law School in New York City. We have a very challenging topic and an interesting one. We're going to get started with that right away so that you'll be able to formulate your questions to be handled in the latter part of our conversation today. I'm going to begin with Natalia Trufanova and just ask her for her thoughts about whether there truly is a crisis of academic freedom, or if this is just a kind of artifact of people debating free speech around the world at the moment, and professors who like to complain a lot about their lives and their work conditions and so on. And also, Natalia, if you could tell us, is the problem equally severe in the humanities and social sciences on the one hand, and in natural sciences and technical fields on the other?
Thank you very much. I think that I'll start with saying a few words about the work of our department and how it is related to the topic of our today's discussion. Well, the main goal of our department is to teach English for specific purposes, professional purposes, the language of science mainly, to the students of Bauman Moscow State Technical University, majoring in industrial engineering, IT, engineering, business and management, and many other specialties. We have about 6,000 students, but also to provide fundamental course in theoretical and applied linguistics to our master's degree students. I think I would like to note that during the worldwide pandemic, we were faced with a lot of challenging things about organizing distance learning, and academic freedom wasn't among them. But I think that it became clear very soon during the lockdown when all our teaching, scientific and extracurricular activities were moved online. Though it is debatable how effective and efficient these activities are, they are open to faculty and students from all universities around the world, and we don't need any passports, visas or tickets to join in, just the invitation and the link. So in terms of intercultural and professional communication, I think a major increase in the use of Zoom and similar platforms can facilitate international academic cooperation. Because regardless of the political situation, all reasonable people are interested in successful professional communication with their colleagues in different communities with different views and backgrounds. In December, our university managed to host an online conference on issues of linguistics and teaching English for professional purposes with a partnership of Eurasian Applied Linguistics Society, Association of Sino-Russian Technical Universities, and representative office of Cambridge University Press in Russia. We had participants from China, the United States, and many regions of our country speaking freely on the Zoom platform about how we can equip our students not only with a specialist language and professional knowledge and professional terminology, but also some soft skills they might need in professional communication in foreign languages, so that they will be able to participate in discussions and make presentations at international conferences, seminars, and workshops. And this is obviously impossible without understanding how people from different countries and different ethnic and religious backgrounds communicate and simply perceive the world around them. So what is appropriate and inappropriate to do and say when you communicate with foreign partners? What do some popular terms like, for example, diversity and inclusion really mean, and what is their purpose? Because these terms might be calqued into the Russian language, but not many people really know what they mean. As for the academic freedom, I think there are several aspects of this term that could be addressed. First, there is the freedom to carry out scientific research, which is one of the core values of modern civilization. And though practices of academic freedom may vary in different countries, I think we can all agree that this is a core value. But also there is the freedom of the scholar and scientist to speak as a human being and as a citizen, together with its boundaries and limitations. Also, this kind of freedom might be limited by our professional responsibilities and professional ethics. It seems obvious that faculty members and educators should not spread inaccurate and provocative information among students, even if they really believe that this information is correct. Like, for example, conspiracy theories and misinformation about coronavirus, or some more serious things like Holocaust denial. We may need to learn to think about normative concepts like moral responsibility, basic human values, and simply common sense, especially in the context of distance education, when everything we say online might become available to the general public. This doesn't mean that scholars are not allowed to offer rational and timely criticism in all areas of social and economic life, of course. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you for that beginning. I wanted to ask both John Drakakis and Nadine Strawson in turn to comment on, you hit on something that I think very often comes into questions about academic freedom in the United States. That is the effort to focus on diversity and inclusion at the same time as normal academic processes. And it is in this area of diversity and inclusion where some academics in the United States and elsewhere run into difficulty with their colleagues, their students, the administrators, because they might say things or indicate they believe things that seem to be at odds with this very important set of goals. And so this is where academic freedom and sometimes the very notion of free speech come into conflict with this attempt to be inclusive. John, have you some thoughts on that matter?
It's a bit difficult, really, to formulate anything as clearly as one would want to there, because I mean, I think there are legal issues, certainly in the British context, with regard to questions of diversity. Inclusion is another matter altogether, because in terms of the institution, it is to do with who has access to higher education, who doesn't, who's included and who's excluded. And the British system, although it's more comprehensive than it used to be, is still an elitist system. I'm not sure if one can say that of the North American situation, or indeed of the European situation. But I mean, you know, we still filter students before they actually come in to the institution, although there's a big debate at the moment about, you know, minorities of various kinds and whether they should be given places in universities. Diversity in terms of questions of ethnic background, I think obviously there are legal issues there, but diversity in terms of points of view. I mean, this is the point at which you test how liberal you really are. Okay. I mean, there is a point beyond which you cannot go. I mean, for example, Natalia mentions Holocaust deniers. Should we give a platform to somebody who peddles the denial of the Holocaust? I would say no. That's certainly one of my lines in terms of the limits of my liberality. On the other hand, I would fiercely defend free speech. Now, you might argue that there's a contradiction there, but it seems to me that in any civilized society, there will have to be limits. And not only do you have freedom, but you also have responsibility. And I think that's the important thing. I think that came under your heading, Natalia, of moral responsibility. And it seems to me that
quite right. Mm-hmm.
If you have freedom without responsibility, you have chaos. Okay, and we've recently had a couple of examples of what chaos looks like. Okay, and so
are you speaking of examples in the UK or a particularly prominent example in the United States?
I was thinking of a particularly prominent and horrifying example, actually, in the States, although that kind of situation could very easily happen in the UK. You know, it can happen anywhere. And in a sense, I suppose you could argue it's the danger that every democracy faces, which is the challenge, you know, to its particular brand of order. So I think from that point of view, it seems to me that diversity and inclusion have to be handled very, very carefully, particularly in relation to questions of higher education, because, of course, sometimes, well, in Britain now, of course, you pay to go into higher education. When I was a student, I had a public grant, and the university had me body and soul for 9 months of the year. So I got a good education, you know, because they forced me to have one, whether I wanted to or not. Whereas it's a different proposition now. In Britain, we have students who have to work to finance their way through university, and the time they spend working is time that they're not spent. They don't spend studying. If they can't afford to go to university, then they're excluded. So there are limits to diversity in that respect, and this is to do, I think, with the much larger issue, which is, of course, the change, the gradual change over a period of maybe 50 years in the UK, probably a bit longer in the States, I would think, of the ways in which universities are actually organized. I mean, the university that I was educated in and the university I went to teach in, I had an enormous amount of freedom. I would not get that freedom now. The university that we now have is a management organization. It's a commercialized organization. And, you know, money drives everything. Now, then, of course, you ask the question, who has money and who doesn't. And that's
that
when
draws a very vivid picture of some of the constraints. Nadine, there's some things that John said that I'd like you to consider. Is there an additional component of responsibility besides the notion of free speech? Are there limits? Are there boundaries to academic freedom?
Absolutely. And when John made his excellent point that he sees a distinction between free speech, more unfettered, and academic freedom, more constrained, he then said, I think some people will disagree with that. And both Natalia and I were shaking our heads because we agreed with that. Academic freedom encompasses the responsibility, the professional responsibility, I would say, as well as the moral responsibility, to use terms that both Natalia and John used, to curate the expression that students receive through the formal curriculum. And I stress that because universities also include other areas that are very important. The open areas of campus that were famously defended in the United States through the Berkeley free speech movement, those are to be treated pretty much like the famous quintessential Hyde Park, right? Where anybody can come and say anything. That's very important. But when you're talking about what courses are taught, who teaches those courses, what materials are included in the curriculum, we have to do a tremendous amount of selection. And if you, to use another example that John used, if you are inviting a guest speaker, you have a limited number of slots to do that. You certainly want to limit those invitations to people who can contribute to the pedagogical benefit of the students, which is not going to include a Holocaust denier. But if a Holocaust denier is standing on the green or in front of the student union and making a speech, he or she has a free speech right to do that. And here is where there's I think the most sensitive issue, where there's kind of a confluence between academic freedom and free speech concerns that are in tension with each other. Natalia alluded to it, and that is the right of professors to speak as citizens, as members of the public. My view, and that of academic freedom organizations such as the American Association of University Professors, is very strongly that professors do not forfeit our right to say even controversial, even wrong-headed, even offensive things when we are speaking in our capacity as citizens. Yes, the university can argue, especially given the financial concerns that John pointed to, that this is harming us because it's damaging our reputation and donors will not give as much money. And the AAUP and other academic freedom institutions has said, that proves too much. That would mean that every single thing a professor says is going to be constrained by the university's reputation. That is completely inconsistent with the free speech rights of that individual. And only in an extraordinarily rare situation where you can show direct damage of a severe kind to the university's reputation should private expressions be undermined. And in fact, we've been having huge problems in the United States, as you know, Sandy, including on your own campus, of students and faculty members really being ostracized and shunned, investigated, in some cases being suspended, even tenured professors losing their jobs because—
That has not happened at Georgetown University.
No, the professors haven't lost their job. I'm so sorry. The most recent incident I'm aware of at Georgetown involved a student this summer, because students also have academic freedom and free speech rights. And there was a student who expressed some unpopular views about public policy issues on a blog that was seen by other students, and he was
right. It was students responding to students. The university did not silence that.
Very fair point, but it still bears on academic freedom and a climate of a lot of self-censorship
right.
and pressure.
Well, just as the university's reputation is not necessarily driven by what its faculty members say and do. It is also not driven by what students do to each other and what they might say. Okay, Alexander, you, in our preparations for this session today, you raised a very telling point in which you said that in the development of competence and the use of technology, which we all know has invaded and perhaps enhanced education, probably enhanced education, we have sometimes neglected ethical concerns. And this flows out of what Natalia and John and Nadine have said as well. I wonder if you could elaborate on that point for us.
Yeah, thank you. In reality, our freedom is very restricted by different regulations. And you told about competences. We have maybe the same model of education as in UK or USA now, which concerned with competences. In Russian system of education, we have a federal standards, and some of the best and most great universities has rights to create own standards. For example, our university have this right to create own standards. So to give diploma of master or bachelor or specialist, we have be sure that the student, the graduate, has all necessary competences. But we, I mean the academic society, have a special responsibility as we educate the next generations of engineers, doctors, philologists, and others who will shape the development of technology and society tomorrow. These people believe us, and we must not only teach them correctly from a professional point of view, but also educate them in terms of morality and ethics. The latest advances in digitalization, big data processing, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, etc., create not only vast opportunities for human development, but also present a huge threat. It all depends on who will use them and how. I tell about technologies. And here, the ethical and moral qualities of professionals educated by our universities play a very, very important role, because we have to understand that new generation will be responsible for our future, And for now, we have such technologies which are sometimes unique, sometimes very dangerous. You have used these technologies for bad and for good things. It's very important. This side of education, I tell about ethics and morality, is very, very important, and we try to do it at our university because we understand that this generation is our future.
You've certainly Go ahead, Natalia. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I could perhaps develop Alexander's idea, because I absolutely agree with him that ethical issues are lagging far behind the rapid advances in technology. And these concerns multiply as artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies quietly begin to nudge aside people, reshaping the future of human rights and freedom. And I think what technical universities could perhaps do is include more humanities in their curriculum to prepare the next generation of technical experts and engineers and programmers and data scientists, and maybe also foreign language instruction, because languages shape the way we think, and learning a foreign language will obviously broaden their horizons. I'm not sure whether it should be separate professional ethics courses or maybe some modules integrated into the syllabus of technical subjects, because technical and ethical challenges need to be addressed at the same time. So basically, students need to develop skills for engaging in discussions about how ethical their research and development is in the technical field.
You know, the converse is also true, Natalia, when you say that technical students should have more humanities education. Humanities students, and from my perspective, law students, need to know infinitely more about technology, because not only has the technology gotten ahead of the ethics, it's also gotten ahead of the law, to cite an example I'm very familiar with.
Yeah, I could agree with that as well. Mm-hmm.
You know,
I mean,
I'm sorry.
No, you
Was that
carry on.
John, please.
Yeah. No, I was simply going to say that encroaches on notions of interdisciplinarity, which I think are very important and which are relatively recent. You know, I mean, I've always maintained that before you can be interdisciplinary, you have to be disciplinary. That is to say, you have to understand the discipline before you know what you want to change. I mean, my first degree was in English and history. I was taught separately in the English department and in the history department. I had to put them together myself, which is not the best way of doing it. I've taught interdisciplinarily with people, and it's a very different proposition. But I mean, the question I wanted to ask Natalia and Alexander is, do you do courses in the philosophy of science?
Or the history of science?
Well, no, the philosophy of science, not just the history of science, because that's where the ethics and the morality would come in. Because I mean, philosophy is all about that in many respects.
Alexander,
we have such courses in philosophy of science. Yes, during their master's degree program, as far as I know, many students of engineering specialties, they have to take courses in the philosophy of science. I'm not sure what their name, what is the name of for these courses, but they do include them in the curriculum.
I have to say additionally that we have a last educational standards in Russian Federation, and for bachelor's and specialist training, we have compulsory courses such as physical training, history, philosophy, foreign language, and life safety. So all these 5 disciplines are compulsory in each program of bachelor or specialist. And other disciplines, each university can include into curricula themselves.
This ties into a very serious, thank you, Sandy, and these are such interesting comments. It ties into a very serious academic freedom problem that's pervasive in the United States, which is we're all in favor of diversity and inclusivity when it comes to people of different backgrounds, which is wonderful, but we're much less tolerant of diversity of ideas, and especially challenging ideas that challenge prevailing orthodoxy, primarily from the left liberal end of the political spectrum. The big area of campus where heterodoxy and rigorous examination and critique of one's own ideas and other ideas seems to be relatively flourishing is in the STEM fields, right? Because that's intrinsic in the nature of science. Of course you question your own ideas. Of course you welcome other people's challenges to those ideas and to your information and to your data. And so I think it would be really, really important, and some of us are struggling in this country to import the, if you will, the methodology, the scientific method into the humanities and social sciences, where too many people complain that faculty and students, that they dare not even question prevailing orthodoxy.
Well,
challenge them.
Yeah, Nadine, I just want to touch on one part of that, which is that in our free speech project, which, as you know, has been going for about 3.5 years now, more than 400 incidents of suppression of free speech or challenges to free speech now documented online. We have found actually that this assumption that it's always or most often opinions on the right being silenced by people from the left. We have actually found that this is not, bipartisan doesn't do it justice. It's totally across the political spectrum, that people have come to believe that they not only have a right to speak, but they have a right to be listened to and agreed with. And so there is no right to be agreed with. There is no right to be endorsed by colleagues on the faculty or other students. The very notion of a university is that people should be debating ideas and going back and forth, and that people have to be a little less thin-skinned about this.
I don't know, Sandy, I certainly agree with that. I robustly defend counter speech for ideas that one disagrees with. But it's to use a term common among lawyers, it's a delicate balance, because at some
of course it is.
You are actually silencing people to the point of so many surveys showing that faculty members and students, and by the way, it pervades the larger society as well, simply will not talk about certain subjects at all, and that you see people being punished and disciplined. It's not just a matter of criticism.
So that's the point I wanted to come to, and I wanted to ask John's view of this. We've had a number of instances, very prominent ones, headline in the academic world anyway, of situations where a faculty member or a group of faculty members will speak out in a way that others find offensive. And it might have to do with hiring principles, what should be emphasized in hiring new faculty members. And so some people respond to that and go so far as to make videos and put them on YouTube expressing their views. And then other people respond to those videos and say, this person should be disciplined for making those videos because he or she is challenging our very principles. And then, of course, conspiracy theories weigh in from the fringes, where people are saying things that others worry might be indoctrinating students in these conspiracy theories. And so how does one referee this conflict that has emerged more and more, not just in this country, but elsewhere too?
With difficulty, I think. And it varies from, I don't know much about the United States, academia in the United States. I've only seen it from the outside, as it were. But the kinds of discussions that people have that I've been exposed to been extremely limited. There has been for a very long time in the UK, particularly in the humanities. I can't speak about the sciences. In the humanities, there have been challenges to what you might think of as the establishment discourse, whatever that might be, okay? That is to say, the discourse that everybody shares. And if somebody comes along, somebody like myself, for example, and challenges that discourse, then, you're going to get animosity, you're going to get hostility. And what happens, of course, is that it opens a discussion. If you win the argument, as indeed we did, then the discipline changes. You know, if you don't win the argument, you go away and think about something else. You know, I mean, it's a sense in which everybody has that response. That's the responsibility that you have to your discipline, or that you have to a series of cognate disciplines. Now, not everybody speaks the same language. And this is a very important thing to remember. You know, for example, I was once at an interdisciplinary seminar, which contained, you know, people from English studies, the languages, history. That was fine, because we all shared the same discourse. Things got really interesting and really confrontational when a mathematician and a hard-nosed empirical sociologist came into the discussion, because then you really had to negotiate. You know, and this is one of the problems with interdisciplinarity, which is trying to negotiate between disciplines which don't share the same assumptions. And, you know, that has always been a problem between the humanities and the sciences. Although, of course, the more you get into your own discipline, the more you realize that, you know, you need stuff from other disciplines. I mean, I work mainly in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Well,
So,
of course.
you know, I have to move into theology, science. I'm hopeless at mathematics. You know, I have to go and ask my children, who know more about mathematics than I do. You know, so it seems to me that we always start from some kind of level playing field, but it isn't level. It varies from place to place, and the pressures vary from place to place. So that, you know, the idea of somebody saying, well, you know, I've got an opinion about who you should hire, and I'm going to make a video about it. I mean, some bureaucrat somewhere in the British system would say something about that, but I mean, no academic would care one way or the other. I mean, I wouldn't worry about it myself. You know, you only worry about it when you've got your ego invested in it. And unfortunately, the humanities is notorious for ego investment. You know, if I disagree with you, I'm not just disagreeing with a set of ideas, I'm disagreeing with your entire mindset. And that's the problem.
And often it appears to people, erroneously, I think, in most cases, that when they're disagreed with, they're being told, you don't have a right to express that view.
That's the next step. Yeah.
And that's where we really get into trouble. And I would argue it comes from all sides, not just from one side. Nadine.
I agree with that, Sandy. So thank you for making that really, really important point. We still have conservative campuses and areas of the country where it is predominantly liberal professors and students who are facing censorial pressures. But to John's point, I wanted to refer to a study that recently came from the University of London, the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, released earlier this month, which showed in both Britain and the United States and Canada, among others, willingness, a desire on the part of faculty members not to hire or not to publish people simply based on their political actions. Did they vote for Trump? Did they vote for Brexit? So let me just read you a couple of the statistics. 4 in 10 American academics indicated that they would not hire a known Trump supporter for a job. In Canada, that was 45%, while in Britain, 1 in 3 academics wouldn't hire a Brexit supporter. Between 1/5 and half of academics and graduate students are willing to discriminate against right-leaning grant applications, journal submissions, and promotion cases. And I've seen this kind of blacklisting growing on law school campuses, which is particularly distressing to me because lawyers are supposed to, as a professional responsibility, grapple with differing perspectives, differing arguments, and there are serious movements not to allow anybody to have any role on campus as a faculty member, as a lecturer, simply if they participated in the Trump administration or were complicit with the Trump administration.
Nadine, I want to come back to you in a moment and ask where in the world these people might have ever learned about blacklisting and how to do it, if this is the first time it's ever happened in the United States. But I'd like to turn first to Natalia and/or Alexander to ask whether these same issues have arisen in Russia. Is there an instinct to try to hire only people who agree with a certain set of views and to put pressure to have that enacted?
Well, I would say that I would call that animosities or hostility, yeah, but there are, certain misunderstandings between people who share different discourse, right? Still, we think it is extremely important right now to preserve the best academic traditions of meaningful, constructive, and open dialogue in all spheres of academic communication. And I'm not sure there are cases that, for example, at Bauman Moscow State University, that certain people were not hired because of their political views. Well, at least I'm not aware of such cases. And I think that our university is a home for people with different views. We try not to discuss them openly, because this is not the matter of not the content of our education. So maybe Alexander has something more to develop this idea.
Yeah, I can add a little. What is the system of employing of academics to Bauman? Each academic has passed through election procedure. So everybody have be elected. And finishing decision takes council, university council. For example, if you are assistant or associate professor, you can be elected on faculty council. If you are full professor or head of department, as for example Natalia, recently she was elected as head of department, so he passed election in big council, university council. She had a speech, 5-minute speech, and answer some questions from members of council, and council decided. And if council say yes, then rector of university or university administration have to sign a contract with academic or head of department. And during the work, for example, I was elected as dean of faculty. During the work, is somebody wrong, I can pass assessment.
Mm. So you could be removed if you were seen to be intolerant of other views or other people.
No, I think that nobody asked us about our political views. Yeah, so university should not become a platform for political struggle. Yes, that's what I think. This is one of the key guarantees of academic freedom, I think.
Yeah, and I tell a little more about our regulations. at our university, academics, members of staff, or students have different political views. And sometimes they participate in activities of different parties, not just state party or different parties. But we have a university charter. This charter does not allow political activities inside university. For each party, even for government, for state party, does not allow, because we suppose that our business, I tell about academics, to teach students, and students' business at university is to learn. And they contact in different social nets, and they can discuss about their views, but it is not does not allow the activity of parties at university. And the same situation is in other Russian universities. Because if we begin discuss about nations, you maybe know that in 1990, Soviet Union was destroyed. Before, we had 15 different republics. Now we have just Russian Federation. But inside Russian Federation, we have near to 150 different nations. Big nations as Russians or Ukrainians, and some small nations, maybe 10,000 people. And as usual, we don't divide people on nations, because
Alexander,
long tradition to live together.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we've opened many Pandora's boxes here that can be explored. I can only imagine the complexity of managing all these nationalities and situations. But it is time to go to our questions. I think Mike probably has some good ones that have come in on the Q&A channel, and we want to make sure we get our participants from around the world an opportunity to weigh in. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for a very interesting discussion so far. Angela Preston says, can someone in the vein of freedom of speech, that is, she says, in a position of power as an expert, take away the freedom of speech of others? Who would like to have a go at that? John.
My immediate answer would be no. On the other hand, it seems to me that in a rational community, then the strongest arguments are the ones that win. That is to say, the arguments that respond, most comprehensively to whatever the question is. And it seems to me that, just any old opinion. I think we need to be very careful here, because we're talking about higher education. Anybody can have an opinion. It's like making a decision. I've always maintained any fool can make a decision. Making the correct decision, making the decision that will take everybody along with you, is another matter altogether. That's a skill. And I think that we seem to flop between one extreme and another in this respect. I mean, I think that the reason why there has been, I don't know, a diminution of respect for experts is because people now feel that they have immediate access to knowledge. What they have access to is information. And what we have to be very careful about is that we don't think that knowledge and information are synonyms for each other, because they're not. You know, knowledge is what you generate from information. It's not, you know, information is not a substitute for it. And I think that, you know, this, to come back to a point that Alexander was making much earlier on about the whole question of, you know, technical advance and ethical questions. You know, here we seem to be moving far too quickly from one position to another without, of course, taking the time to, you know, to define our terms carefully. And so, you know, if you have social media where anybody can voice an opinion, and where you have, you know, politicians whose job it is to run the country, who spend most of their time, as far as I can see, on social media. And I mean, I'm not just getting at Trump here. You know, we've got our own Poundland version of Donald Trump here in the UK. And I mean, I don't do social media. I don't know what Twitter is. I couldn't care less about it. What people are saying about me, who cares? You know, I know what I'm interested in. I know what I want to do, and I'll do it. And that's that
Can I come back? Can I come back now? Because Angela has added another question to this, which perhaps Nadine, you might like to take. She says a professor at Harvard Law wrote an article denying the experiences of comfort women with a minimum amount of references. Does he have carte blanche, freedom of speech, as an expert on law?
He has, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Michael. He certainly has carte blanche to write whatever he chooses. He does not have carte blanche to have it published in a credible academic peer edited journal. He certainly does not have carte blanche to propagate that misinformation to students in his professional capacity as a lecturer. He certainly does not have carte blanche to be invited to deliver a prestigious lecture at the university. So you're really teasing out the distinction we made earlier between what you do specifically in your professional academic role versus what you do as a citizen exercising your free speech rights, which are broader.
Thank you for that. Claire Jenkins asks, so it's in a similar vein, are voices of minority groups excluded from academic debate because of their underrepresentation in the academy? I wonder, Natalia, would you like to think about that one?
Well, do we talk about gender minorities or national minorities? No, they're not excluded, absolutely. As for example, gender equality, I know that there are traditionally more female scholars in the humanities than in engineering, for example, but gradually this situation is changing. In the recent years, more and more female students are receiving presidential grants and win scholarships. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
I wonder.
It's a tricky question because when you talk about the representation of minorities in the humanities, that means selecting particular texts that you know, reflect the experience of those minorities. And I mean, that's changed quite a bit, I think, over the last 30 or so years. I mean, the syllabuses that you see now are very, very different from those that you would have seen 50 years ago. And that's as a result of pressure of, you know, more inclusive histories, things of that kind. I mean, history is a changed subject in that respect. Literature courses are changed. I would imagine law would be as well, although I mean, I couldn't speak to that myself. But you know, and I think that these things happen as a result of the various pressures. But I mean, it is the case that you know, minorities are underrepresented. I think you have a problem though, because if then you allot various places or various spaces to different minorities, you end up with, I think, a situation which in the States, I understand you've pulled back from now. You know, I mean, my view is that you want the best qualified person for the job, you know, and really that's to do with a lot of things. And, you know, ethnicity and gender are not the main thing in my view. I've worked with many women who are far more intelligent than I am, and I've been delighted to appoint them. I've worked with many men who are as thick as two short planks, you know, and given the chance, I would have them out the door. I can't because they're protected. Their freedom is protected. You know, so it's really a question of how we factor in the whole issue of what it means to be a member of an ethnic minority. I mean, there are certainly, I mean, it's, you know, it's easy to tell in some cases, but not in others.
I think Sandy's desperately trying to cut in here.
I just want to weigh in with a quick question. If the playing field is not level in many disciplines, which we must acknowledge it's not, it simply isn't. Ideologically, gender, you know, ethnic minorities, et cetera, many fields have been dominated for a long time. How will we ever fix that if we don't take some reparative measures? How will we ever make the playing field level if there aren't some even temporary efforts to diversify the people making the decisions, defining the discipline, reviewing the articles, doing all of these important scholarly things? If it's just left to a small aristocracy of the discipline, if you will, which has been defined the same way for a long time.
That's a very sorry.
Yeah, pile on, please, because I was itching to make a similar point, which is that the criteria that you referred to, John, which are obviously really important, but they're so subjective. And we now have, to me, really frightening but compelling studies that show that all things being equal, people will prefer somebody who has a male name or somebody who has a, quote, white name versus a black name. These studies have been done very rigorously, including of student evaluations of faculty members teaching, as well as faculty members' evaluation of each other. I think we all have to have the humility to recognize, not surprisingly, given the societies we've grown up in, that what we might think of as objective and fair-minded evaluations may in fact be tainted. So I think to overcome that demonstrated reality, I agree with Sandy, we do have to make some affirmative outreach efforts, at least temporarily.
But some people will see that.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Do you think, can I get back to questions? Do you think, from another question on this, that there is also a difference in the way the universities themselves are considered from country to country? For example, is there any kind of discrimination against one country against another country in relation to the league tables of the top universities in the world? And is that related to language, and maybe the language in which a country might be writing its research reports, or a university might be its research reports? Alexander, you got any views on that? Alexander, you're muted. Okay, yeah.
Mike, what kind of discrimination? Inside country or between the different countries?
Between universities around the world. We've been talking about discrimination within universities. Is there any discrimination between universities around the world and faculties?
I don't think that we have some kind of discrimination, but you know, Mike, that after destroying of USSR, our university began to work more close with West universities and with universities around the world. But till now we had arrests of the problem because in past we published our research in domestic journals. But for now, we participate in competition and in world ranking, QS ranking, Times ranking, etc. So we are very pleased to publish articles in journals which indexed by Scopus or Web of Science. And for now, our position is bigger and bigger. But I think that our real position have to be bigger because, for example, we have a very good scientist, but if you see my example, Natalia is younger than me. When I studied my English, I never supposed that once I will use it. And to publish in Web of Science and in Scopus is quite difficult from point of view good right English, for example. It's one thing. Another thing, we have no tradition to invite international professors to our universities. Until now, if we compare rates of international professors at Bauman, for example, or other ranked university with Oxford, Cambridge, or Zurich University, we will not be winners in this competition. And I think
well,
that
Alexander, I think I've been a winner because you invited me on a couple of occasions, so I'm very pleased about that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I could add maybe something.
Natalia.
You know that we have I'm sure that everyone is familiar with the saying "publish or perish" in academic context. In Russian, it was modified as "publish in English" or "perish." So I believe at present there are, of course, much more opportunities for international research collaboration. And studies have shown that diverse groups of researchers have a greater chance of producing creative work. Besides, they are more highly cited. So I think this is what we're supposed to do. Collaborate on some research projects.
But touching on some of the problems in the United States, there's been a not so funny joke that here the motto is publicity or perish. In other words, your social media persona is perhaps even more important than your scholarly publications.
But this is an attempt to try to persuade the public at large that universities have a use, isn't it? You know, to put it frankly. I mean, they're no longer, you know, sort of ivory towers. What they're doing is important. And therefore it's important to get yourself onto TV, be consulted as an expert, sit on national committees and things like this. And of course, all this does is to increase the public kind of persona of the institution, really. It doesn't affect that much. Certain circumstances it does, but certainly in what I do. Who cares what I think about something in
it's a very, very important thing. But I don't think that competition between universities is a bad thing. I think this competition is a part of our collaboration. For example, some years ago, I visited MIT in USA during 1 month. And I saw a very good example of approach to interdisciplinary research at MIT. And for now, we introduce this system in our country, not just in our university, because we are preparing and near the finishing of preparing new educational standards, which allow us to make interdisciplinary curriculums, which is very important. I agree with you, John. It's very important thing. So I think that we have to tell not about competition and about cooperation with university, because each university has something good, something not very good. And we, inside this collaboration, we became stronger.
Yes,
I'm going to have to go back now to there's a question here on diversity again from Al Zahara and Ansari. He says, while talking about the limits to inclusivity and diversity, who holds the authority to draw lines about the constraints, seeing a stark difference between various regions and countries of the world, given their diverse political cultures, educational cultures, and state-university relations? Then the question still persists whether creating these lines of guards can be possible by creating a homogeneous charter for academia and the general public. A homogeneous charter, is that a possibility, do you think, Nadine?
It's a really interesting question, and I've been pondering it because last summer, the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Opinion, Expression, and Belief, David Kaye, who happens to be an American law professor, did a very interesting report on academic freedom for the UN General Assembly. I highly recommend it to folks. And he pointed out that there is not an agreed upon international treaty that governs academic freedom. So he started this initiative comparing different countries and what the internal values were of academic freedom, and actually came out with a lot of commonalities and ended up with a series of recommendations for the global international community, steps that all governments should take, steps that all universities should take, and steps that all members of civil society should take. And I see this as part of the more than transatlantic, the global dialogue that we're fostering here, because I think that what brings universities together, we have much more in common than separates us. We can learn from each other. There can be refinements and disagreements, but I think that we can forge some common concerns and some common strategies for advancing those concerns, to the benefit of ourselves, our students, and the larger society.
I think that's a lovely moment, really, and a lovely note on which I'm afraid I'm going to have to start to draw this to a close after what seems only about 5 minutes of discussion. It's gone so quickly. Sandy, would you like to add anything before I wind it all up?
Just very quickly, I want to thank all our panelists. This has been a wonderful discussion, an appropriate one in our series. I do want to point out that in April, probably late April, our next international dialogue from our projects, Free Speech Project and the Project on the Future of the Humanities, will be on the theme of whether free speech has survived the pandemic and around the world. In the meantime, next Monday, March 15th, we in the Free Speech Project at Georgetown will have a forum on free speech in the financial markets, growing out of some recent controversies in this country. And then on the 8th of April, we'll have a program on the necessity, whether it's a necessity for regulation of social media. Thank you all. Thanks to you for taking the time to do this. Mike.
Well, thank you, Sandy, as well. And my thanks to Alexander and Natalia, Nadine and John for, I just found it just a great and interesting discussion. My thanks, of course, to colleagues at Georgetown University, to the President, Jack DeJoy, the Vice President, Tom Banchoff, and the Interim Dean of Georgetown College, Soyika Colbert. Thanks also to Kevin Pollack for our US Administrator and Curry Johnson from the Free Speech Project, who fed questions to me and the colleagues who made the Zoom possible. At Blackfriars Hall, my thanks to John O'Connor, the Regent Richard Finn, the Director of the Las Casas Institute, and Kinga Ranagabnai, our UK Administrator. Thank you, all of you who have asked questions. If they weren't asked because of time constraints, we will endeavour to get back to you. We're now taking this break until I think it's going to be about the 29th of April.
I think that's our tentative date.
Yeah, that's a date. It's around there that we'll have a dialogue on this this freedom of the individual in the pandemic. The next Zoom event on the Christian Literary Imagination series will be next Tuesday, which is March the 16th at 3 p.m. GMT, 11 a.m. EST. The clocks have changed in America, but not in Britain. So please note that that's a little bit of a change, but it's 3 p.m. GMT, 11 a.m. EST, when Dr. Paul Edmondson from the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust will be talking about who else but Shakespeare. Please have a good Easter. Thank you for your support during the course of this term. And I do hope that you will join us again at the end of April. And also that you'll take these two talks that we've been talking about for next week. I'm Dr. Michael Scott. I'm Fellow and Senior Dean at the Blackfriars Hall in Oxford. You can follow me on Twitter at Mike Scott Prof. Until next time, take care, keep safe. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.